Okay, you're live.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here for the Monday, July 12th City Charter Advisory Review Committee. I'm going to go ahead and ask Keith, are you able to call the roll for us? Do you have a full attendance list? Okay, I will take that as a no. So I will go ahead and call the roll. Actually, does anyone else have a full attendance list?
We can use the Zoom link. Oh, we won't recognize the emails.
Right. Okay, I actually think we can do this in reverse order. So what I'm going to do, since we don't readily have a list of everyone's name, I'm going to ask everyone who is here to please state their name for the record. If we could start with Ms. Brown, could you confirm your attendance?
Joyce Brown attending.
Okay, great. Mr. Blackman, could you confirm your attendance?
Yes, Wes Blackman is attending.
Mr. Goodstein, could you confirm your attendance?
Dan Goodstein is attending.
Okay. Ms. White, could you confirm your attendance?
Yes, Barbara White is attending.
Deborah, can you confirm your attendance? And forgive me, I do not know your last name.
All right, I didn't type it in. Deborah Robert is attending.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, could you confirm your attendance?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, and then Mr. Gallegos?
Anthony Gallegos, present.
Thank you. And then we have a phone number ending in 229.
Zaid Chauncey Basha, present.
Okay, thank you, everybody. All right, so I believe we have a quorum. And with that, we will move to the pledge. Since we do not have a flag, the general rule is that you face the United States Capitol or the next closest flag that you know of. Sam, would you mind leading us in it?
Sure. Everyone ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the
republic
for
which
stands one nation under God,
indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
For all. I forgot a word.
Okay, thank you, everybody. All right. With that, since we're doing this by Zoom, and you all seem like you're Zoom pros, but the city clerk advised me that I should just kind of provide some Zoom 101s. I think we're small enough that we don't necessarily need to have everyone on mute by default, but it is a good practice that if you are not speaking, to please mute yourself. And additionally, we're going to use the hand raising function. So is anyone uncomfortable or unfamiliar with raising the hand in Zoom? Okay, great. And of course, we want to have a fluid discussion here. So if the
wait, yeah, Ramsey, hold on 1 second. Ramsey, this is Zaid. I am on my phone, so I am not able to use the hand raise function.
Okay, so Zaid, we will trust your discretion here as to when to jump in.
And Ramsey, I have no idea of what you mean other than raising my hand like this. So.
Okay, that's fine, Joyce. So that'll work great.
Okay.
Okay, so jumping into the meat of it here, we are meeting. Yes,
I'm sorry, I can't see if she raises her hand. I'm on my phone, audio only.
Oh, okay, Zaid, I'll call on people. So if you would need to respond to a comment of Ms. Brown's or ask her a question, I encourage you to just jump in so accordingly. Okay, so we are meeting today for our last meeting to discuss election issues broadly. This will hopefully be the first of 2 such meetings if we are efficient in our work here. But obviously, it's important that we get as many ideas and we flesh this out as much as possible, because this gets to the very heart of who and what our city is and who and what we want to be. So with that, and in following in the spirit of the current city commission, I actually think it would make sense for us to go around and have everyone share their general thoughts on election issues and what they would like to see us specifically tackle and discuss. And then from there, we can move into the formal discussion to try and develop specific items to vote on. Mr. Goodstein, you have raised your hand.
Yeah, I would like the members who are on video to enable their video. That's also, I think, a best practice. They may not be familiar with how to do so.
Okay, thank you. So if anyone, obviously video is encouraged here. This is a public meeting. And I see that Mr. Wilson has joined us. So we have our secretary present. Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Okay, so with that, I'm just going in the order of how you are all on my screen. So Mr. Goodstein, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. If you have any specific thoughts on what you would like to see us address as it relates to election issues.
I think it's probably a good idea to go through the things that the city clerk has highlighted in the copy that she sent around. But the,
okay.
Yeah.
Would you be comfortable leading us in that exercise?
Sure. The first thing that comes up is election districts. So does anybody have thoughts on election districts?
Well, Sam, I think to keep things organized, I'd appreciate if you would first share your thoughts, and then Wes will share his thoughts, Joyce will share her thoughts. Let's see, because I'm hoping we can find consensus through conversation preemptively here if possible. If that's not possible, we can totally take it as a normal conversation.
Okay. In terms of election districts, I think it's probably not important to change them because having the 4 election districts gives us representation on the city commission from each district. The terms are a big question, and I'm not quite sure what my conclusion is on that yet. I've heard many people wanting to have term limits, but I have heard many variations on the types of term limits, whether it's 2 terms and done, or 2 terms and then electability to the mayoral citywide office. And I also have some thought that in a small city like ours, maybe it's better not to have term limits. Oh, and there's the other option of do 2 terms, take some period of time off, and then eligibility for another set of terms. So my mind right now is kind of open on that. And on that, which I think is the biggest issue for us, I would be interested in hearing other people's thoughts.
Okay, and with that, Mr. Blackman, you are next on my screen.
Okay. I'm going to repeat what I said during my interview pretty much. And it only lasted 4 minutes, so hopefully it'll just last that long here. As being a longtime City of Lake Worth and City of Lake Worth Beach resident since 1992, and also been involved in the electoral process and serving on advisory boards, I have always come down to the conclusion that we should re-examine how we elect our individual commissioners. And what I would like us to explore is the notion of having our four district commissioners elected from their individual districts that they represent. And that would be what is referred to as single member districts. But I would take it a step further, that it should be proportional and it should be adjusted according to population so that the 4 districts are less geographically equal like they are now in 4 quarters, with the center of it being Dixie and Lake Avenues, or Lucerne Avenue, I guess. And have it be proportional so that the population is roughly equal within each district. So that would be some redrawing of districts based on census counts, and that would take place every 10 years. So, and then I would do the radical thing to suggest that we add 2 at-large positions instead of the 5 at-large positions we have now. We would have 4 commissioners elected from their individual districts that would be proportionally allocated based on population, and they would be only voted on by people within their district. Then we would have 2 at-large commissioners, quote unquote, that would be elected from the 4 corners of the city of Lake Worth Beach. And so would the mayor, and those 3 could live anywhere in the city. So that's what I would propose. That was the big radical thing that I said during my interview, and I guess it was good enough to get me on the committee here. And I think it would ensure, number one, that we draw from the talent pool that is present here. We would have more people sitting on the commission and making decisions on behalf of the city. We would have 7 instead of 5. And I think that's important because we do have a lot of talent in the city. It will be a way of nurturing talent, and perhaps people could work up from a district commissioner seat to an at-large seat to a mayor's seat. So that's my radical concept there. And I think the model city charter that we were given at the last meeting, explores that sort of option. And like Sam, I think we need to look at term limits too, because I think we went through a period where there was a bit of stagnation on the city commission. And it would be nice to have some limit, or at least some knowledge that there is the possibility of the sun to set and a new sun to rise on certain positions, elected positions. So beyond that, I don't know what else I would do to change elections.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blackman. Ms. Brown.
Yes, I actually prepared a few things, and the district was certainly one of them. Lake Worth recognizes the right of every registered voter living within city boundaries and within a city district to elect representatives only from the district in which they reside. All districts will vote for mayor. The next one might be a little bit controversial, but from the conversation last time, where we can make changes that are enhancements but not detractions. I think that was kind of the gist of what was said. Lake Worth Beach recognizes the right of every citizen 18 years and older to vote in city elections. It therefore grants universal suffrage the right to be registered and to vote to every citizen within city boundaries. Each citizen 18 years and older will be automatically registered with the supervisor of elections office by the city of Lake Worth Beach. Each citizen will be registered as nonpartisan partisan voter. Each will have the responsibility of changing that status or not to a political party of their choice so that they can vote in primary elections. That's a universal suffrage amendment to this. Party affiliation, Lake Worth Beach will allow candidates to declare political party affiliations if they so wish. And November elections, Lake Worth Beach elections will revert to 2-year terms and coincide uniformly with state and national election days for primaries and general elections. My initial thoughts on everything.
Hey, Ramsey, can I interrupt for a second? I just jumped on this thing because Glenn had a conflict with attending tonight. But if y'all are just going to sort of narrow down your scope of changes y'all want to do, if there's not a need for an attorney, I don't want to spend the city's money on listening in. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm happy to stick around. But if y'all still are just getting together your thoughts, I'll jump out.
No, Madam Attorney, in my opinion, we would greatly appreciate that. And I think what we'll do is if we have specific questions for you, we'll formulate them at the end of the meeting and submit them in writing.
All right, that's perfect. All right, y'all have a good night.
Thank you very
You too.
much.
And
Thank
good
you.
luck. And good luck.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Ms. Robert.
I'll unmute. Apologize, I have landscapers outside, so if it sounds a little buzzy, my apologies. So far I'm tracking with what folks have said. In terms of election districts, I do think that would be very interesting to explore redrawing them somewhat to get a bit of a population spread, and also maybe look at a demographic spread there too, because I personally get tired of hearing across the tracks and across the other side of the tracks. That kind of bugs me. And I don't know if that's something we can look at to maybe integrate a little bit more figuratively, literally, when it comes to districts. How we elect commissioners, this single member districts, I think that's a great opportunity to explore. For districts, I think if we play our cards right and we divide the districts up in a more fair way, I think we'll probably be fine with 4. Sorry, I'm blanking a little. My cognizance not the greatest today. In terms of term limits, 3 years, perhaps 2 terms, but I did like the idea of maybe a time off, and perhaps not back at that same position. I think that would be something that I'd like to explore. So that's pretty much the core. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable with everything I've heard.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morgan.
Hi, so in regards to single district voting, I am for individuals just voting within their districts. I believe it protects city politics from being one-sided. And I believe that other changes to election law could encourage more voter turnout. And so it's important to make sure that we nurture a new interest in voting, and make sure that our city politics isn't too one-sided. Although it's not to discourage the participation of those residents who are involved in the city, but I think that while we work on getting more people involved, it's important to make sure that the city's politics doesn't become unbalanced. And I believe I had a question. Are we going to then talk about the other topics or the other parts of the election law, such as the the term limits? Because I thought we were just talking about district voting right now.
Well, Mr. Morgan, I think this is an invitation to get it all on the floor. And I'm hearing that people want to discuss term limits because, of course, as we all know, this is all very connected, right? We move one piece, it will affect another.
Well, yeah. Well, I guess I might as well say I'm also I'm for term limits, and the reason why, although I believe that at the local level it's not as necessary, but I believe that there was so much interest, or there is so much interest for change, not only at the local level, but at national level, that it'd be important for our local politics and regulation or rules regarding voting to reflect what we want possibly at the national level. And so for myself, I would support term limits. As it stands now, maybe 2. I'd be very open to discussing like what are the pros and cons of that. But I think that term limits is important. It would send a signal out to the people who are, watching the charter review for some change that they can actually think about later on. And I also believe it is very important that we change our elections to November in order to encourage more voter turnout. And I heard, as everybody else did, the concerns of the clerk. But I think, again, I believe that, with the recent elections in our city, we know that the people are interested in real change. And I believe changes to election law for the city is very important to make sure that the people aren't disappointed after this charter review. I think changing the election time to November encourages people to participate. I think single district voting makes sure that our political or like that our representatives are interested in hearing what everybody has to say, not just the people who are involved the most. And yeah, that's all I have to say in regards to election law.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Goodstein, I see that you've raised your hand, but I'm going to ask that you wait until everyone has had their first pass. And with that, Mr. Wilson.
Yes. Yep, I'm off mute. I actually prefer what we have today, the at-large representation. Because I really enjoy being able to vote for all my representatives. I like the fact that they're all working for me. They all have my interest at heart. There's not just a specific one who's looking out for me. Concerned if commissioners represent just a single district, then we'll see a lot more political fighting. Each commissioner will be trying to bring home the benefit to his or her own district. So I really prefer what we have today. Additionally, for term limits, I think it'd be reasonable 2 term limits, keep the terms at 3 years and the ability to run again once you take 1 term off.
Okay, do you have anything else to add?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, great. Ms. White?
Hi, everyone. Sam, I'm sorry. My computer just sort of just went away for a minute while you were on. So I didn't hear your position on everything. So I apologize for that. But I'm more in favor of the single district. I do think that it allows for, I would at least hope, and it seems like from reading some things that it would allow for greater diversity on our commission. And I really honestly believe that for me would be a goal, being on this committee is to help create greater diversity amongst our representatives, because Lake Worth is really quite diverse, and that's the beauty of this city. So unless literature says something different, I would be more prone to wanting single district. I do like Wes's idea, though, that maybe you do have a seat or 2 of at large along with the mayor. I kind of think that's an interesting idea. So I would be open to listening to more about that. And I also am in favor of term limits. You know, if we do it, sometimes, 2 years, you can't get a whole lot done. 3 years, you're just getting your feet wet. So I don't know, maybe I would think more like two terms, 4 years each term, and then not be able to, sit out for an election and come back. That's it, the full 8 years, and that would be it. So that's basically sort of where I'm at. I don't know the cost. I think if we go to single districts, I think we have to be careful of the Voting Rights Act, of at least of what's left of it. And we may have to, that may end up costing too much to be able to do that. And we don't need a lawsuit that we're not in compliance. So I don't know enough about that. That may be a question for Christy. But that's something I think we do need to consider the cost of if we do need to redistrict or even going into the single district. They were saying, some of the literature was saying that you have to be aware of violating the Voting Rights Act. I just don't know enough in terms of what we would need to do. So that's it.
Thank you, Ms. White. Mr. Gallegos?
Yes, hi. So like others have said, I am in favor of discussing redrawing the districts, the voting districts, to better reflect, to more proportionally reflect population and also diversity in terms of demographics, race, ethnicity, income level, age, etc. I think that's a good idea. Let's see what else. I am in favor of single member districts. I think it just makes sense rather than have everybody vote for every commission seat. I think, yeah, it just makes sense to vote for your own commissioner. And not only that, but for candidates, potential candidates, it would be cheaper to run, which is always a good thing. It would increase, we could see like more people running for these seats, more accessibility. Right now, if it's pretty expensive if you want to run for a commission seat, you gotta campaign throughout the city. And even though Lake Worth is only, population of about like 40,000, it's expensive for the average resident. And so, yeah, I think that would be hugely beneficial if we switch to single member districts. In terms of term limits, I'm ambivalent at best when it comes to that. I'm not really in favor of it, only because I think that, it's like, what if the commissioner or the mayor is popular? What if they're good at their job? Like, I feel like we should let the voters decide. I mean, I understand that, you get into these points of stagnation where, like, it seems like the commission or the mayor's been in their seats for forever, and nobody's willing to run against them, or nobody's able to, or whatever. But I still think we should let the voters decide that. And I don't know, I'm definitely open to hearing everybody's arguments for term limits. I'm just not. I'm not really so much in favor of it. I guess the last thing is more of a technical issue. It has to do with certification of the election results. As I was reading, I was wondering, like, what happens if, like, the commission, for whatever reason, refuses to certify the election results. Should that be left to, like, maybe an independent board or commission or something? This is really like a kind of a technical, like, edge case kind of thing, but it's something that I thought of as I was reading. So yeah, that's it, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Gallegos. Mr. Monroe? You are muted. Still muted, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend last week. So my first question, other than what you're talking about now, is, was an email sent out with minutes of last week's meeting?
Mr. Wilson, did you have time to put together minutes?
I thought, after speaking with the clerk, that she was going to set up the meetings. What I have are the priorities we put together and the orders for those priorities. I can send those out now to this meeting address if you like.
That would be much appreciated. Mr. Monroe, it's my understanding that minutes can be voted on at subsequent meetings. It doesn't have to be the immediately subsequent meeting. So we'll make sure to get you a copy, and then at our next meeting, we can vote accordingly.
Right, it's just to keep informed since it was the first meeting. One thing is I'm finding the delays of notification too short. So for example, tonight I have to leave in the next half hour because I didn't see this email until Saturday, so I had things booked up. I'm semi-retired, I'm usually available, but need a little more notice. Are we scheduled now for every Monday at 5 or every second? What's the story?
We had a robust discussion at our last meeting. I'm sorry you weren't able to make it. We're hoping to move at a kind of robust clip here. As of the moment, we are scheduled to meet on the 28th, also at 5 o'clock in the conference room at City Hall.
On the 28th. So is it the same day of each time? No, it's not. So that's on a Wednesday.
No, we had come to consensus on when we were going to meet. Unfortunately, there was a little more discussion with the clerk that was had. So at that meeting, we're going to have another discussion as to when we should meet for
Perfect. Got it. Perfect. So I'm paying a bit of catch up and just listening to everybody. I'm in agreement with Wes Blackman on these Cedar 2 at large. I think that's a fantastic idea. And I'd like to hear more about it. So, and then by the same token, I'm in favor of Dave Wilson with the 2 terms of 3 years each. I think 4 years each is people can become complacent in a 4th year of a position, in my opinion. So basically, I'm playing catch up, and I'm really excited to hear what y'all are saying. So just feed me, and I'll tell you what I think another time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Monroe. Mr. Shamshi Basha.
Hello. Am I coming through right now?
You're coming through, but you do have an echo. So if you could mute one of your devices.
Okay, is that better?
It's not ideal, but I think we can get through it.
How is this?
Much better.
Okay. Great. Is it my turn to speak, or did you call on me because I raised my hand on the laptop?
It is your turn to speak.
Okay, great. Sorry, this is difficult. I can see you guys, but I can't talk on my computer. But I can talk on my phone. Can't see myself, can't hear myself, but that's okay. So yes, I am a fan of single member districts, and some person made a point about we need to make sure that the new voting scheme complies with the Voting Rights Act. And I just want to point out that when the Justice Department typically comes in and sues a city for a violation of the Voting Rights Act, what they're trying to achieve is a pure single member district election system. So we are actually less at risk of violating the act if we move to an SMD system than as we currently are, and also than if we have 2 new commission seats at an at-large basis. And I do want to say something else about the at-large basis proposal. I love the idea of increasing the amount of people on the dais who may be experts, subject matter experts, or just great people that we need to hear from. But you have to do the math. And if we currently increase the council size from 4 individual districts plus 1 mayor who's at large to 4 individual districts plus 3 at-large votes, and that would be the mayor and the 2 new at-large representatives, we have 7 total votes. 3 of those votes are at large. The most voting district, if it joins the at-large votes, will have a 4-vote majority every single time. Yes. I think that the idea of increasing the amount of commissioners is not a very good idea. I think that would leave us right where we are currently. So I think we need to keep the size for districts and not expand it to 2 at large. I also do think that, and Wes made this point, which I think was a very good point, we do need to ensure that the districts are proportional in representation in population. That's another thing that the Justice Department is going to look at every single time. So if we want to move towards full compliance with the Voting Rights Act, which you guys are correct, has taken a hit in the last 2 weeks, then I propose we move to single member districts, 4 districts, proportional in size rather than geographical boundaries, and keep the at-large mayor, who will still give an at-large voting block in the city and votes on the dais. Oh, and I fully support moving the election day to November. I think that's extremely important. I understand there are some logistical and perhaps financial reasons why that's not something we could do with a snap of a finger. I would love to explore those in depth. Also, regarding term limits, I'm against term limits. I think this last election, at least for me, motivated me to get involved. I've never been involved in local politics before, despite being an attorney. I was motivated, I was inspired, and I think that something special exists in Lake Worth, and especially in Lake Worth's electorate. I think when they need to come up to bat, they will. And I think that term limits would do nothing but prevent this electorate from having its voice heard every single time, no matter how long someone has been doing the will of the voters in office. So I oppose term limits. I don't think we should add that to the charter. And I think that's my position on all the issues you guys have raised. Hopefully I was coming through clearly. Apologize for the technical snafus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shamji Basha. Okay, so that has everyone, unless I missed anyone. So speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, so Mr. Goodstein, you've had your hand raised for quite some time.
I wanted to speak to the November-March issue because we have, some people might not have been here long enough. We've gone back and forth on that. We were now in March, we were in November. Before that, we were in March. The practical nature of campaigning in March is that it's actually more possible to do effective campaigning in March. My experience on the ground is if you have a group of motivated people in Lake Worth, because the turnout is low, you can flip a seat. In November, you get higher turnout and you'll get higher numbers, but it's more random. The feeling is that this is an intuition. This is not based on any numbers. The feeling is that it's a little more random because you have so many people voting that it's harder to get a message out, both because people are fatigued from whatever message, because they're getting their doors knocked on by state and national campaigns. So there's a practical consideration beyond just getting more people to vote. And that's, again, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but that's got to be a consideration.
Mr. Blackman.
Yes, I seem to have tremendous powers. I can lower other people's hand and do all kinds of other things, but I can't raise my hand for some reason. So I'll have to do it like this. But, following up on what Sam said, I think we went through a time over the past 6 or 7 years, was it, when we did have November elections. And in my mind, I count that as a failed experiment. Being a candidate and being involved in campaigns during that time, there's a tremendous noise factor in November elections in terms of the differentiation from national and local issues. And it's very difficult to communicate local issues when you have the national dialogue taking such center stage in the barrage of ads and everything. And people are, frankly, you may get them out to vote, but they're probably going to be less educated about their vote when they do vote in a municipal election in November than they would be if it were in March election during a quieter time. And that's why I think I'm safe in saying that 38 or 39 of the 39 Palm Beach County municipalities have their elections in March. I think I think Boynton may have theirs in November, or they might have gone back to March, but the vast majority and almost unanimous number of Palm Beach County municipalities have March elections. And I think much of it is for that reason, that it is easier to get people's attention on local issues during March. It's also easier to get volunteers. There's a limited number of people who are politically active and have the energy and the drive and the desire to be part of a political campaign and contribute their time and volunteer their time. And what you're doing is, if you have November elections, you're competing with people who might be, want to participate in local campaigns, but find themselves overbooked in a November situation. We also had a situation because of the 2-year terms, we were like a three-legged horse, one that had a limp, because we would have great turnout for districts 2 and 4, but we would not have a great turnout for districts 1, 3, and the mayor. It was lopsided. So, for example, on the even years, when the midterms and the presidential election came out, you had maybe 6,000, 7,000 people voting in a municipal election for districts 2 and 4, and you had a much smaller amount, maybe our typical Lake Worth 3,000 coming out for the March election. And does that make sense? I mean, you're getting a different group of people voting for people in 2 and 4 than you were in 1, 3, and 5. And it just didn't make sense. Now that we have 3-year terms, the clerk pointed out that there would be one odd year where we would be the only game in town in terms of having to pay for our own election too. So I feel very strongly, if you can't tell, that the November election idea was a failed experiment. We've tried it, we've done it. The electorate decided to go back to the March elections, and I'm very comfortable with that.
Mr. Morgan.
Well, as since I brought up the November elections, I totally understand that the as Mr. Blackman has been a resident here, he's in Lake Worth much longer than I have, probably involved in local politics much longer than I have. I can understand how we came about the March election sessions, but I truly believe that there is a movement towards prioritizing or giving more attention to local politics in our day and age. And I believe as times change, as demographics change, I think moving local elections to November will make a statement and will force or make people think of local politics as important as federal politics. I think one of the downfalls of our democratic system here in the United States has been that we are too focused on the federal level and not so much in our own backyard. And although I totally understand the points that are being brought up, I think we shouldn't try to judge the November election cycle so much from the past as how it could change in the future with other changes to election law as well.
Mr. Shamji Basha.
Hi, yes, am I coming through?
You are.
Great. I would like to echo what Daniel just said. I think that at this point, we are past COVID. Voting has changed probably more in 1 year than all of American history. combined. I think that we have seen a grand experiment of democracy and the expansion of access to voting. And I think what we're seeing across the country is a wave of jurisdictions making it simpler and easier to vote. It looks like a voting national holiday may be something we see in our lifetimes. If that happens, a Lake Worth election in March 6th, that's the definition of being on the wrong side of history. I think that we need to make it simpler, not more difficult to vote. And as far as simpleness goes, it certainly would be voting all at once. I think that the voters are smart enough to be able to handle the noise of multiple campaigns existing at the same time. And I think it's a trend that the 30, sorry, my numbers may be wrong, but I think it's a trend that the governments and jurisdictions across the country are moving towards. And so eventually those numbers will switch. I don't think we'll have 38 out of 39 jurisdictions in Palm Beach County remaining in a March, with a March date. I know those conversations are happening throughout the county as well as here. So I would just like to voice my support for moving it to November and really dig into the logistical and administrative challenges that may come along with that.
Well, in light of, Ms. White.
Now, just have a question for Wes. In terms of when it was in November, was there a huge difference in the population that voted for Lake Worth elections during that time?
Well, it depended which year. The year that districts 1, 3, and the mayor were on the ballot and up, that was a much lower turnout than districts 2 and 4 because those happened to be on the odd year on the even year elections. So they had the benefit, districts 2 and 4, of a larger voter turnout based on the national election scenario. So everyone that was voting for president or representative was also voting at the same time. There was some drop off, and that would be interesting to look at. And by the way, the statistics are going to be available for this. So we should go to the supervisor of elections and see exactly what those totals were over those years, because we have had this experiment of November elections in the city of Lake Worth Beach. And I think it would behoove the committee to really dig deep into that data and look at that. By the way, I have my camera off because I happen to be having my dinner right now, and I don't want you.
We greatly envy you, Wes.
Enjoying my dinner here.
Mr. Goodstein, oh, go ahead, Wes. You're not done?
Yeah. So in answer to Barbara's question, yeah, there were different people because there were 3,000 more people, and they couldn't be the same people that were the same 3,000 that voted for the mayor and 1 and 3. But like I said before, were they actually more informed about the local issues, or were they just there because it was time to vote for a national seat? And I think that's a valid question to ask. There was something else. And now that we have 3-year terms, we would have the odd year that we wouldn't have an election too.
Right.
The other thing we found out with the November election is that some people thought, well, geez, I must have missed the March election because it was always in March. I've lived here for 30 years. We always voted in March for our commissioner. What are we doing voting for our commissioners in November now? And so we may have had some drop off there, that they didn't know that it was time to vote for a commission seat in November.
I mean,
anyway,
Wes, that gets to where I'm at with this, because I'm very passionate about moving to November. However, the clerk properly scared me at the last meeting as it related to the logistical and financial costs of doing so with our current 3-year terms. So I actually would like to ask everyone if, you think the 3-year terms are something we should address, because from my understanding, practically and financially speaking, if we are going to move to November, we would have to go back to 2-year terms, which
Yes.
I will note, the people of the city just voted on, and I believe that was not a tight majority. It was, there was a clear majority in favor of moving to 3-year terms, or going in the other direction. I mean, is there any support for going to 4-year terms? Because I don't think this discussion about November is tenable unless we're willing to go in either of those directions. Mr. Goodstein? Sam, you're muted.
I second everything you just said. 4-year terms could be considered if we made it a hard for 4 years with no term limits. But mainly, I wanted to say I would like to hear the chair's views on these issues.
Right. So, as your chair, I think it behooves us to try and give the commission, actionable items. Right. I think, our job here is to move this city forward in terms of making sure that we become a more democratic and equitable space. City, I don't think the current situation is tenable. I mean, I'm not a civil rights attorney by any means, but I think it's very clear to me from my reading of the National League of Cities model charter that we are not in conformance with the spirit of the Civil Rights Act. So I don't really see how we can not go to single member in that context. That said, I do recognize that at-large districts are also very much a best practice. Right? I mean, passionate reformers, passionate progressives, have history very much on their side when it comes to this issue. Surprisingly, the National League of Cities is pretty aggressive in saying that they recommend it. So I go back to, Mr. Blackman's recommendation of somehow expanding the commission. So, doing a hybrid, which is something that the National League of Cities does recommend, right? Is a hybrid. I'm going back to these issues because, I think all these things are very much connected. And I think it behooves us as a committee to first and foremost figure out who we want to be voting for, how we want to be voting for them, before we figure out when we're voting for them. Because if when isn't even a financial or practical option, I prefer that we use our time figuring out how to, reinvigorate our democracy and the franchise here with how the actual commission seats are elected and how they're allocated. So that's my 2 cents. Ms. Robert?
Yeah, I pretty much agree that I think when it comes to the November election, it may take care of itself. I mean, has anyone spoken to the supervisor elections to see how all others are thinking about that? Because that might just be a county effort a couple years down the road even. It might be something that everyone will pursue in tandem, which would make a heck of a lot of sense too in terms of budget and like that. So that was just.
I think that's a great idea. And I would actually ask that maybe we table the discussion of the November election until we have more formal feedback from the supervisor of elections and the city clerk. So I would ask if anyone would like to actually take that on as a homework assignment to reach out to the city clerk again, to reach out to the supervisor of elections and ask what do we practically and materially have to do to actually move to November? And I think if we can get that from them, then we can all have a much more focused discussion on this issue at a subsequent meeting. Yes, Ms. Brown.
Yeah, first of all, I think the financial aspects of voting in November are skewed when we have a 3-year term. And I do believe that we need to go back to a 2-year term so that every election that we have coincides with an election that's already taking place. That immediately solves your financial problem because the elections are already set up, so that we don't have to call a special election just because we're out there alone. For the district and the at-large district people, one of the problems with voting for everybody at one time is that there is a group of, the majority of our votes come from one particular place. And when you have a large people running, it takes you right back to that position again, where it's already been stated that you have the communities that are basically underserved and don't have the representation, as much representation, because they don't have the right to vote for their own candidates at that time, are once again outvoted, on the commission, so that there can be other people around doing things that can be appointed for their skills and their abilities, but they don't have to be commissioners to do that. We just need to have their skills and abilities available to us on the commission and in the city. And I think there are all sorts of wonderful ways of doing that. The districting again, I think, is an absolutely critical thing, that we have, that we have people who can vote for their own folks. The other thing is that when you have single districts that we're voting for, and I think it was Daniel that said this, but that you have the ability to spend far less time in the entire city and more time in your own district educating people as to your positions, and educating people to your whole platform, which means that you have a better chance of getting voters out to vote if they know who you are, they care about who you are, or anybody on these teams. So I think, a lot of this has to be reconsidered now. And again, I think the 3-year term can be put up for a vote again with all of these criteria and money saving, as well as anything else in mind. And then the term limits become even easier to deal with. You can have 2 terms, you can have 3 terms, and nobody becomes embedded in that office and makes it their life, career.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Brown. Those are all good points. Mr. Wilson?
Yes, I would just say that I've worked the election and most of the elections since I moved here 10 years ago. And certainly financial considerations are important, but it is not that big a deal to hold elections in March. I know the city clerk would disagree with me because I've seen just how frantic she gets when she needs to put on a special election. But let's not be driven entirely by finance here. What's best for the city? If we have to pay for it, we may need to pay for it.
I'm very sympathetic to not being penny wise, pound foolish here. And I think that actually dovetails with the discussion of how many commissioners we want to have, because I think, there is clear literature that shows the return on investment in additional oversight and additional representation is overwhelming. But I still want to go back to my suggestion. Is there anyone here who would take it on themselves to reach out to the city clerk and the supervisor of elections and try to organize what is the practical plan that would have to be implemented to get to a November election?
I am not volunteering, but I believe we would just have to do it. I'm not sure what else there is in the question. We decide when we want to do it, and the city clerk organizes it if she has to.
Duly noted, Mr. Wilson. I think the issue is that if we just say, hey, this is what we want to do, and we go in front of the formal city commission and say, hey, we all voted in favor of moving in November, and we don't give them a fully baked plan to do so, they may not give it the consideration that we hope they would, right? Mr. Morgan?
Yeah, do you think we as the board could just ask the clerk to reach out to supervisor elections to ask their feedback on what it would look like if we switched over to November elections?
Mr. Morgan, is that something that you're willing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I can, but it would be as not just Daniel, but the board asking for this information. Is that correct?
I can't make a motion, but if someone would like to make a motion to that end, I'd be very supportive.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you, Mr. Morgan. You've been appointed to get us a plan from the supervisor election and the city clerk as to how we move to the November election. All right, with that, I think we're going to table that one. And from what I heard in our discussion, it seems that there seems to be a lot of consensus around term limits, except from Mr. Gallegos, and I believe Shamsi Basha. Did anyone else have an objection to term limits broadly that I'm missing? Okay, so with that, I suggest that we dive into this one because I think it might be an easy one to get to consensus on. So I'd like to open up the floor to hear, a little bit more from everyone as to what you'd like to see in terms of the flavor of term limits. And of course, being respectful of Mr. Gallegos and Shamsi Basha's differing opinions. Ms. White?
The reason why I'm not in favor of the 2-year term is that people are just, like I said, they're just figuring out sort of their role and their priorities and the issues of the city. And you're going to turn around and they're going to be campaigning the second year versus focusing on what they have just figured out, what their priorities may be. So 2 years to me always seems to be too short of a time because you're running for re-election almost right after you get elected. So that's why I've never been in favor of those. So, and then the 3-year, we know what the problem is with that because it's not going to coincide with the federal. So that was why I thought 4 years was my opinion. I know that then extends if you do 2 terms, that's an 8 years, and that's a lot of time to some people. But then that's it. You can't now then jump to, a different district or take off 1 term and then come back. So it would be 8 years max, and then after that you can volunteer. So that's just my opinion.
Would you be open to people running for other seats? So if you did 8 years, say as a single member district representative, and then ran for one of the at-large seats or the mayor's seat, would you be open to that?
I'd have to think about that, but my initial gut reaction is no, because you just end up getting then career politicians, and as of late, that's just not something I'm in favor of anymore. So for me, no, I wouldn't. I would say no.
Okay. I mean, I'm very sympathetic to term limits because I ultimately think, especially in the weak mayoral form of government that we have, their job is policy, right? We want people getting up there and pushing policy.
Right.
I'm
not total. Yeah, I'd have to really think about that piece. So I'm not totally opposed. I would just have to think about that one some more.
Anyone else have any thoughts specifically as it relates to the flavor of the term limits? Mr. Morgan.
I think when we combine term limits, or let's say this, if we do 2 years, I know that I agree with Ms. White that it's you're like already gearing up for elections. But I think if we do the single member district voting, we will take a lot of work out from the candidate and their campaign, because they'll be more focused on their district. And I think that's a bonus that comes with single district voting. And or I think if the 2 years seems too short, 2 years with no term limits, or 2 years with no term limits, or 4 years with term limits, 2 term limits. Again, everything with single district voting.
So can I actually ask who is in favor of even considering a reversion of the 2-year term? I want to emphasize that the people of Lake Worth really did vote against this. Wes, by any chance, would you happen to recall, or could I even ask you to pull up what the vote was moving from 2-year to 3-year?
Yeah, I'm going to stick myself out there, volunteer to actually go to the Supervisor of Elections.
Thank you. That's
website.
much apprecited because from
And
my
for
recollection,
the next meeting, I can, or through the clerk, I can arrange to have presented the historical data that shows both the difference between November and March elections, maybe over the past 10 years, and we'll see the drop off between the odd and even years. And then the other issue we're just talking about too. So I will compile all that information.
okay, thank you. Because I would ask us not to spend too much time exploring the reversion of the 2-year term unless there is a clear majority on this committee that this is of material importance, or that the prior vote to change the charter warrants it. But I don't believe it does. I believe, this issue was robustly determined by our fellow citizens, and we should listen to them and build on top of that. That said, I am personally open to exploring the 4-year term if that's what gets us to the November elections, but I'd much rather go in that direction than go in the other direction. But I will note, getting back to how this is all very connected, personally for me, I'm much more in favor of a 4-year term if we have term limits and we have an expanded commission, right? Because the same thing is, being stuck with someone for 4 years, right, is a long time. So we need to make sure that we're providing options to kind of, offset that longevity in terms of people's ability to exercise, a democratic change of the commission. So, with that, Ms. Robert, I believe you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just thought too, with term limits, it always gives me the idea that anyone that's out there that is even thinking at an early age or a younger age that they may want to run, when there's a lack of term limits, it kind of gives some people the feeling that there may not be a chance, or what's the difference anyway? This person's just going to get voted back in. I think a turnaround is healthy, and I really think we should think about it in terms of people that hadn't had a chance or hadn't thought about the chance. This would really help boost that, I think, when you have term limits. That's something else to think about. I think 8 years sounds like a very, very long time. I kind of like the 3-year sweet spot. It just feels right. You get kind of ready and oriented, the first 8 months or so, then you really get the ground running, and then you start thinking about edging out or re-electing at the end. 4 years is a long commitment depending on who you get, but yeah, definitely term limits. That's what I'm thinking.
And Mr. Shamshi Basha?
Yes, Ramsey, I like what you said about expanding the amount of commissioners in order to increase the options with such a long 4-year term limit. But I would just like to note that if that was the case, that I would be in favor of that expanded commission be a result of an expanded number of single member districts rather than at-large members, because I think we have to really focus on the math here and execute what it seemed that the electors of Lake Worth asked us to do, and faithfully execute that.
Okay. All right. So I think what I'd like to do this time is take a poll, since I can't make a motion, but take a general poll. Who is in favor of some form of term limit? Okay, and Mr. Shamshi Basha, we cannot see you. Could you say whether or not you are in favor of some form of term limit or not?
I'll go with the consensus. Yes, we can do that by unanimous consent.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So next question then becomes, I think to kind of narrow this down is, who is in favor of definitive term limits, meaning that if you serve 2 terms in 1 seat, or be it 3 terms, that you cannot run again for that seat ever again, not even if you take a break. Is anyone who is in favor of truly definitive term limits per seat?
Now, let me ask you this though, Ramsey, would that include, because maybe this could be another distinction, you could only run for city commission for the term limits, but you can run for mayor.
That's my next question, right? Mr. Shamsi Basha, we can't see how you're voting, but for the prior poll, Miss Brown and Miss White were the only two who raised their hands as to the ability to having definitive term limits. But Ms. White, yes, you bring
Yeah,
up the
I can
next
see you
question?
guys now.
Okay, great. All right. So Ms. White, you bring up, which is the next question. Can I ask, who is in favor of having the ability for people to obviously serve 2 terms or 3 terms in one seat and then run for another seat?
And to me, it would depend on what that other seat would be, just for clarification.
Okay.
I think I would be opposed if we were going to go to at-large city commission seats. I think I would still be opposed to that, but I don't think I'd be opposed for running for mayor.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so what I'm seeing is we have a clear consensus here, not consensus, but we have an overwhelming majority as it relates to adopting term limits. And we have an overwhelming majority in terms of allowing people to run from one seat to another seat as need be. We also have a clear majority, forgive me, Ms. White and Ms. Brown, it seems we have a clear majority that people can run for a seat, serve their term limits, take a break and come back, unless I'm hearing objections from anyone else on that particular issue.
If the seat is their district seat and everyone is representing a district rather than at large, then they would not be able to run for another district seat because they wouldn't be living in that district. So
Of course.
The only other option is mayor, which would be fine.
Right.
With me.
Mr. Shamsi Basha?
Sorry, that was an accident. I did not mean to raise my hand.
Okay. Mr. Goodstein?
Would this allow somebody to move to a different district and run for additional terms? I'm assuming that we're going to single.
I think that's a very good question. I believe, yes, right, that it would be very hard to write into the charter an explicit prohibition that once someone has held one office, they're term limited from holding another office in the city of Lake Worth, right? If you are so beloved that the people of Lake Worth want to reelect you and you're willing to move domiciles, I do think rules are, meant to, we got to ask, what is the goal here, right? And to me, the goal of term limits is twofold, right? It's to facilitate, a more dynamic commission, right? On one hand, to facilitate policy, to facilitate better governance, to facilitate, a more equitable democracy, because, more people can be involved, and that's one side of it. But the other side of it is also to obviously honor the will of the voters, right? And make sure we're electing the best people. So if people are so fantastic that the people of Lake Worth Beach really, really want to be able to reelect them over and over and over again, I think there should be a process for doing so. And if it includes, the hypothetical of someone who wins their single member district seat, and then they win an at-large seat, they've exhausted the term limits on both respectively, and then they want to go move to another single member district, and they can win there, God bless them. We should all be, in my opinion, be so lucky to have such a fantastic civic leader in that context, right? And I think if you allow for that, it gets back to Mr. Gallego's original comments, which I thought were very insightful about, term limits shouldn't be at the cost of democracy, right? So that's my little spiel here. Ms. Robert, you've had your hand up for some time.
Yeah, I see what you're saying about being able to, I was thinking that too, about someone that was able to move and then just jump right into another commission seat. The thing that upsets the apple cart with me a little bit about that, again, is because there could be someone that's in that commission area, in that district, that has already been thinking in their mind that they want to run, and they've been because this person's so popular, they're just over, it negates again someone fresh that might want that position. So I would say yes, they could do that, but perhaps one election cycle break before they could. And also you've got to move where they're going to actually relocate. When does that relocate take place, and how long do they have to be established in a certain neighborhood before they qualify? So that's something to think about too.
I think that's an exceptional point. Mr. Morgan?
What I think we want to avoid with the term limits and the being able to, run for commission seats as in the single district, and then if the at-large is something that is adopted by this board, go to the other one or become mayor. Of course, it demonstrates someone's capacity and popularity amongst the residents. I agree with that, but we also don't want it to become like a mockery of, I'll pull out a PO box somewhere and I'm just gonna keep running forever. You know what I mean? We're trying to make a statement. So, and what's the statement? It's like, yes, as an individual, you can be very well at your job. The ideas and your points of view, your perspectives are good, but doesn't mean that other people aren't able to do the job, or that you wouldn't want to encourage other people to do the job. Like career local commissioner politicians, what drives them to be in office for so many years is a great love for public service. I would hope so, but we definitely don't want it just to be, the way I'm gonna get around term limits is I'm just gonna move my PO box from one district to the other district. I think that's what we want to avoid.
Mr. Blackman? Mr. Blackman, you are muted.
There we go. I will piggyback on Mr. Morgan's comments there. I do think we need to look at the resident requirement. Right now, it's pretty loosey-goosey in the charter. Maybe not as it's written, but as it's been enforced. Right now, I think you just have to live within a district 6 months before qualifying, something like that. And how is that exactly determined? And if we do go to term limits, I'd like the idea of having a single member district commissioner serve 2 terms, be term limited, and then have the alternative for them be run for mayor if they've proven themselves as a good commissioner. So maybe that's something we can focus on, but I do think we need to look at beefing up the what actually makes you a resident of a district. If we do make that sort of change in terms of the especially important with single member districts, since you are in essence representing the people in the district that are electing you to sit in that seat. So let's put that on our to-do list too. I'd also like to respond to something that I said earlier, and in my mind's eye, I've always thought of the 3 at-large seats along with the 4 districts. But as I'm thinking about it, and I listened to Mr. Samshi Basha, he is right that you could have the gang of 4, and every vote could be 4-3, and it would be District 3 along with all the other at-large seats. And then we're not really that much farther from where we are now. So I wouldn't mind looking at 6 single-member districts and then 1 mayor. And then we stay with a odd number that way.
And Wes, forgive me for interrupting, but that gets to your original idea about having realigning how the districts fall geographically, the proportionment of them.
Yeah, so you wouldn't rely on geography necessarily. You could use it as a guide as a starting point, but then use population as the ultimate place where the line is drawn.
So would you be willing to actually maybe, as we've done with the November election, dig in a little further as to what would practically be required to make that happen? Because that sounds very attractive to me, but it also sounds administratively daunting, right? And this gets back to, wanting to have actionable items here. So, if we're looking at, a very expensive, having to hire demographic consultants and, it's prohibitive, I'm not sure we should explore it further, but if there is a way for you to organize what the homework would be, I very much would like to consider that further.
Well, I can tell you what the homework could be because I was actually involved with it when I worked for the city of West Palm Beach in their planning department back in the early 1990s. And they at one time had proportional districts and single member districts. And I remember after the 1990 census, working with a colleague in the planning department. It was actually done in the planning department. And we looked at census data by block and throughout the entire city of West Palm Beach, the geographic limits of the city of West Palm Beach. And we had a basis, a starting point, and then we said, okay, we've had a shift here. We have to include this block. And it really is within 2%, 3%, you establish a margin of error about which, how much you're going to give one district over another in terms of population, and then work towards that. And it is, you end up with a gerrymandered line, just, following the blocks. However, and eventually that's voted upon by the commission. So we have to keep that in mind that, having a firm geographic boundary eliminates the playfulness that you can create by, oh, let's include that apartment building. Because I know a lot of people in that, particular apartment building. So I would like that, that building in my district. That's something we have to keep in mind, but that was the process. And it was done every 10 years as part of the census. And I would also say this is also on our to-do list that we talked about at our last meeting. And that was the cycle of review for the charter, I think could coincide with that 10-year period and be a census. And that's kind of a benchmark that I have heard other communities use as a time to relook at their charter.
Okay, Mr. Blackman, I can't make a motion, but I still would ask that, and I'd ask my fellow committee members here, maybe to do as we've done with Mr. Morgan, to empower you to reach out to the clerk and the supervisor of elections to ask what would practically go into changing how we do the apportionment. I'm very interested in knowing a little bit more of the history with West Palm, specifically why West Palm has stopped proportioning their seats accordingly and why they've gone back.
Okay, that's something I can look at.
Okay, I mean, yes. Do you need a formal vote here?
I'll just do it and bring back the information. It may not be at the exact next meeting, but it will be soon.
Okay, thank you. Ms. White?
No, all I was going to say is that if there's this incredibly popular politician that you were saying, Ramsey, that we may want them to run again, they can then move on to county commissioner.
That's a very good point.
They don't have to totally leave the political arena. That's all.
Mr. Goodstein?
I just wanted to make sure everyone understands that you can't, like Daniel, you cannot just have a post office box. You have to reside in the district. So a commissioner cannot just pop over, change their post office box and run in the other district.
I was told by a reputable Lake Worth historian today, though, that there is precedent for mayors who maybe weren't in town all that much. Granted, this was some time ago, but okay. All right, yes, Ms. Brown.
Can I ask that when this data is gathered, that it be shared with all of us? Is there a way of doing that if we're doing things, before the next meeting or before, or if anyone has ideas that they
Yes.
want to share so
I
that
can
people
do that
can
through the
look
clerk.
over?
Yeah.
Through the
I wouldn't
clerk?
be emailing individual members. I would do it through the clerk. and
Through
they
the
would
clerk,
distribute
okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, and for record, Ms. Brown, and for everyone else, if you do have information that you think would be helpful for your fellow committee members, just email the clerk and ask her to forward it to everyone else. That's all you have to do. Okay, so we have Mr. Morgan working on the homework for the November election. Wes, you are Mr. Blackman, you are working on the homework for the proportionment and the how that we could change the geographic allocation of the seats. I think this now brings us to the question of single member versus at large, right? So, I'd like to hear who here is not in favor of somehow incorporating single member districts. So is anyone here absolutely adamant against having any form of single member district?
That's Mr. Wilson.
Duly noted, Mr. Wilson. Would you be willing to just elaborate a little bit further on that?
It's just a general feeling, as I say, that the people who come out to vote get to vote our elected representatives. I've seen plenty of other cases where when we have gerrymandering, we have a district carved out, that you might get a representative in there who elected by a very small number of people and who has equal power with the rest of the districts. When I moved to Lake Worth, one of the things I really liked about it was the fact that we have the at-large representation. It was a surprise to me. The more I thought about it, the better I like it.
Ms. Robert? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I've liked the mixture as well. I've being able to take a look at all the different candidates as a resident. And, gerrymandering is something I do think about. And I also think if you go to just the single district, that can happen too. And that's why I'm very interested in looking at redistricting, just look at the districts and see how they really blend, see what the demographics are, because I think we need a little bit more of an even mix across districts. I think would help alleviate that. So I just, I have it with a little bit of reservation, but I'm open-minded.
Mr. Goodstein.
I just wanted to speak to the two sides of it. There are people who want, and who I have discussed the single member districts before, have objected to them, saying that people would only be wanting things in their own area. They would only be advocates for their own particular district and not think of the health citywide. And I've thought about that, but then as working on a campaign, the effect is you have to run on the issues that are important to the districts that vote more. And that in itself leaves out the issues that are important to the issues that the areas that vote less. So the people who say it's important for the citywide, not to have horse trading and not to have people only interested in one part, miss the fact that the campaigns never address issues particular to the lower voting districts. And having been in them, we have in recent years been the receivers of much generosity from the commission. They finally paved some roads that had been left unpaved for 70, 80 years. But to depend on the generosity of people is it's uncomfortable, and you can't rely on it, right? It speaks for itself. So I favor the single member. I don't know how a citywide elected commission will receive the recommendation to go to single member, but perhaps that's not something we should have in our minds. I don't know.
Anyone else? Okay. Does anyone want to speak in favor of the single? Oh, Ms. Robert?
Here we go again with my mute. No, I just, again, I'm thinking, just to be candid, we talk about having districts that do all the voting. Well, we have the power to maybe look at those districts again and break them up differently. I know that's something we're going to look into, but that frustrates me when we say, oh, this district's always going to be this way. This is this way. That means this is one ethnicity. This is another. I'm a little like verklempt on that. And that's why I kind of think like looking at district lines would do us a service.
Okay. So to that end, the time is now 6:35. Recognizing that this is a very nuanced discussion, and this all kind of flows together. What I would actually recommend is that at this point we just bring the meeting to a close insofar as let's make sure that we're all of our issues have been addressed for the evening. Let's make sure that any homework that we want to see for the next meeting is brought back, and then when we are in person at City Hall next at our next meeting on the 28th, and hopefully we've had time to review the homework specific to changing the geographic lines, specific to moving to November, right? We'll be in a stronger place to say, okay, here's maybe some things that we could actually vote on that would be practical and possible within those. Because I will note, as it relates specifically to this issue, I'm very much in favor of expanding the commission, right? I'm very much in favor of single member districts, but I also recognize that at-large districts are a best practice, and that's going to be very influenced by how Mr. Blackman's homework comes back and how the proportionment would work. So, Mr. Goodstein.
Do we have any legal questions we want to send to the attorney? I think the question of whether we can do proportional districts just as basic are the things that we're considering legal. That's all.
I would agree. We should ask that question.
Mr. Blackman, can you take that within your remit for your general homework here?
Sure. I will talk to I'll take Ms. Godot's offer and give her a call and just see what she knows about proportional districts in Florida.
And then, Mr. Morgan, since you're reaching out to the supervisor of elections about the November election, we had at the last meeting asked the attorney and the clerk about the practicality of ranked choice voting, which I will note is addressed in the National League of Cities Model Charter. Mr. Morgan, if you're comfortable, could you also inquire with the supervisor of elections as to what would be practically required for that? So that's something I'm particularly passionate about.
And you're referring to like the residential requirements?
No, I'm specifically referring to ranked choice voting. Actually, Mr. Morgan, this is an issue that I'm very passionate about. If the committee doesn't mind and you don't mind, I would actually like to take this as my homework assignment.
Can you explain to me what ranked choice voting is?
Yeah, ranked choice voting is where your vote, you get more than one vote essentially, right? And if your first candidate doesn't get 51%, ranked choice voting.
Oh, I thought you said rent.
No, the other way to do it is you just have two votes.
Yeah, one or two.
Right.
Yeah, I could, if you want. I'm sorry, I misheard you. I thought you were saying rent, like a poll tax. But if you want, since I'm already talking to the supervisor of elections, I'd be happy to ask her what she has to say in regards to changing the elections to November, or the city of Lake Worth moving their elections to November, and what she has to say in regards to ranked choice voting in Lake Worth. I could do that for you.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm already calling.
Thank you.
I think I would love to hear her say what they have to say about either both of those stuff.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have anything else that they would like addressed, would like to discuss this evening? Homework that they want to see before the next meeting, issues they specifically want us to address at the next meeting?
Do we have any questions from the public? Do we know that?
You know what? I actually was on a public comment that was sent to the clerk. I do not have the ability to readily read it right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the clerk, or I'll have it printed for the next meeting. Okay. I will go ahead and make the motion to adjourn.
Seconded.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
I.
All right. Thank you, committee members. Have a good evening.